what happened to Marius when he fled Rome, a fair few years, like about almost 4 or 5 years ago now, when Sulla first marched on Rome that time and was personally burning down houses and things. Marius just about got out of Rome by the skin of his teeth, but was immediately, as I said, declared an enemy of the state. So he really is on the run. Now, he has a bit of an Odyssey, Marius, and I'll skip through that reasonably quickly, but there is lots of detail, particularly in Plutarch, about it. His idea is to, if he can, get to North Africa, because he knows that at Carthage, or the governor of North Africa, is at least indifferent to Marius. He's one of those people who neither liked nor disliked Marius. Now, that's his best shot at this point. Hopefully, fingers crossed, if he can get there, perhaps the governor of Africa won't just have him immediately arrested and executed. But he's in Italy, right? He's just outside Rome at this point. He's got a long way to go. So we're told at first he's able to commandeer a ship. Now, this whole time, it seems like, if you believe Plutarch anyway, it seems like pretty much this whole time there are Sullan troops or agents on his tail the whole time, like just behind him, hours behind him at all times. So he commandeers a boat and starts travelling down the western coast of Italy, but there's a big storm and he's sort of nearly shipwrecked, or he's sort of forced to land again against his will. The few handful of men that are with him are completely exhausted and haven't got enough food or water with them. Eventually he finds himself, he's literally on the run. So he finds himself, he has to, quote, plunge deep into a wood, just a random wood, to try and hide, just physically hide. And he's extremely hungry. There's a nice little story where, classic ancient historian thing, where Marius tries to decide if it's even worth still running for his life, whether he should give himself up, which would be certain death. And he looks at the flight of certain eagles and eaglets and the way certain eagle eggs that he found in a nest. And he decides, no, I've got to keep trying, got to try and get away. He knows that his son, the young Marius, who will come into this a bit, his son is on the run as well, but is ahead of him and looks like he's probably got away. He needs to at least try and, for the sake of his son, he needs to try and survive if he can, try and meet up with Marius the younger if he can. So he's got to keep trying. Plus, there was an old prophecy that he should serve 7 consulships, and he's only served 6. And he thinks it's really written in the stars. The gods themselves, fortune itself, has decreed long ago that he should have a 7 consulship. And until that dream is dead, i.e. until he himself has been killed, he's gonna keep that dream alive. But he's nearly found in that wood, him and the very small number of men that are still with him. And they're nearly winkled out of that wood. And we're told that at one point there's a ship just off the coast. Who knows whether it's a friendly ship or not? But Marius and his men are just sort of forced onto the beach, quite literally at this point, running for their lives. And they dive into the sea and began swimming out to this random merchant ship that's just off the coast, hoping at least that maybe that will save them a few more minutes. And we're told that when he gets on board this ship, the beach is covered with Sullan cavalry, and the cavalry are shouting out to this merchant ship, give up, surrender Marius. You've got that guy that's just swum out to you is an enemy of the state. He's Marius, who needs to answer for his crimes. Give him up. And we're told that Marius on the boat is crying. He's literally in tears. Well, the tears are running down his face. And he appeals to the sailors, just random sailors. He appeals to them saying, no, look, I'm the great Marius. I've saved Italy 6 times. Don't you remember I won the war against Jugurtha? Don't you remember I won the war against the Cimbri and the Teutones? Don't you remember I'm 6-time consul? You can't just hand me over to my enemies. And the sailors apparently are in 2 minds. The very fate of Marius is hanging in the balance. But what they decide they will save him, or at least they won't just give him up to this random cavalry officer on the beach. At least in this moment, Marius outranks some centurion. So they save his life. They do basically save his life. They thought that, quote, it was not honourable, they thought, to surrender Marius, but it was not safe to keep him, end quote. So what they do, they take him a few miles, they sail a few miles down the coast and then drop him off literally sort of abandon him, because they know if they get caught, if they do get caught with him, they will face the death penalty themselves. So they'll save his life in the absolute immediate, but they want to get rid of him. So that's what they do. They just abandon him on another beach a few miles down the coast. And Plutarch says, quote, Marius was now deserted by everyone. For a long time, he lay on the shore, speechless. Finally, he pulled himself together and with great difficulty went forward with no kind of path to guide him. So he's just stumbling through the wilderness now, alone, completely alone, making his way through deep marshes and ditches full of mud and water. He came upon the hut of an old man who worked the fens. Marius fell down at his feet and begged him to save and preserve one who, if only he escaped his present danger, would reward him beyond all his hopes. This random old man, Marius, the great Marius, is relying on him. And the old man does help him out. We're told that he leads Marius sort of deep into the marshes and gets him, quote, to crouch down in a hollow by the riverbank and put on top of him a lot of reeds and sticks, enough to cover him and not heavy enough to hurt him, end quote, because Sulla's troops are still on the trail. So now Marius is sort of Saddam Hussein style, completely on his own, hiding in a muddy marsh with some sticks over him, so that hopefully when his enemies pass through that area, they just won't actually see him. You know, it's dire straits. It's as dire straits as it gets. But eventually Sulla's men do come through there, and Marius decides he needs to make a run for his life. Perhaps his hiding place wasn't good enough. And we're told that he flees through thick mud and the water of the marsh, but is eventually sort of ridden down, and he's not killed on the spot, which you might expect, but he's, quote, dragged out all covered in mud and taken naked to Minturnae, a town called Minturnae. And at Minturnae, he's put under arrest, put under close guard. And the townspeople of Minturnae, because he was arrested by just a very, very small number of Sullan troops, the townspeople of this Minturnae now have to decide what to do with him. I mean, really, it shouldn't be up to them. You know, he's an enemy of the state. And a decree of the Senate had been passed that he should be taken back to Rome and executed. But they decide whether they should just kill him right away or hand him over or what. And they decide that it is best if they just kill him. That will garner them the most favour with the Sullan faction and the Optimates and the Senate in Rome. And so Plutarch tells us, quote, meanwhile, the magistrates and town council of Minturnae had been discussing the situation and had decided to put Marius to death without any further delay. No citizen of the town would take on the job of executioner, so a cavalryman, either a Gaul or a Cimbrian, both versions of the story are current, took a sword and went to Marius's room. He was being held just in a normal house, a normal little old lady's house was his prison, apparently. There was not much light in the part of the room where Marius happened to be laying. In fact, it was almost dark, and we are told that it seemed to the soldier that the eyes of Marius were darting flames at him, and out of the darkness came a great voice. My man, do you dare to make an end of Gaius Marius? At this, the foreigner threw down his sword and rushed straight out of the room. He ran out of doors, crying out simply, I cannot kill Gaius Marius. So he lost his nerve, quite literally lost his nerve. In Appian, he tells the same story. He says there's sort of a great shining light or flame darting out of Marius's eyes. You can tell Marius now is in his 70s, early 70s, but he must have still had, you know, that presence about him where someone's come to kill you, and by rights they should kill you, and it's absolutely in their best interest to kill you, and you just raise your voice with a bit of gravitas, and it's enough to make him turn on his heel and run away. Quite a remarkable story. And so the people of Minturnae go on after that incident to decide, oh, actually, perhaps, you know, who are we to kill six-time consul, saviour of Italy, multiple-time saviour of Italy, Marius? Who are we just to kill him? Actually, it was dishonourable of us to even think that. Actually, it's dishonourable if we don't help him escape. So what we're going to do is somewhere in between. We're not going to kill him. We're not going to give him much help in escaping, but we are going to let him go. It's funny, It's funny the way it goes, but that is what we're told they do. And they let him basically escape their town. And so, moments away from death, Marius is back on the run. And we're told he's able to get back on boat again. He's able to sail as far as Sicily, but the Roman quaestor, sort of reasonably senior military quaestor on Sicily, is pro-Sullan. And so as soon as he hears that Marius and a few of his men have landed, he goes straight down there with a cohort of soldiers, and he kills 16, we're told he kills 16 of Marius's men who had just gone ashore to try and get some fresh water. Marius sees this happening, manages to just about jump straight back on the boat and flees again for his life. So again, moments, perhaps just a few hundred yards away from death again, but he's able to get away from Sicily, and it's a relatively short hop from Sicily to North Africa. And so finally, he does find himself landing on the shores of modern-day Tunisia, North Africa, and we're told that the governor of Africa, Sextilius, where, you know, the hope had been all along that he would be kind enough to Marius, that he wouldn't have him arrested or executed, who, quote, in the past had neither been helped nor harmed by Marius. We're told that no, he decides, no, I'm going to arrest you and kill you if I can. I make the calculation that's in my best interest. So the whole plan to get to Africa came to nothing. So there's this image of Marius essentially in the ruins of Carthage at the lowest possible ebb he could be. A great paragraph from Plutarch who says, quote, when Marius heard this, grief and indignation made him speechless. So an officer from the governor of Africa, from the governor Sextilius, an officer of his comes to Marius and says, no, if he can, he will arrest you. And a great paragraph from Plutarch says this, quote, for a long time he stood there in silence, glaring at the officer, who finally asked him what he had to say and what answer should he take back to the governor. Marius then groaned aloud and said, tell him that you have seen Gaius Marius sitting as a fugitive among the ruins of Carthage, thus quite cleverly putting together and comparing the fate of that city with the change in his own fortunes, end quote. But it's not over. Still, Marius is able to sort of just flee in the other direction. Again, not really knowing where, no real plan, but just trying to stay alive from one day to the next or from 1 hour to the next. And we're told at this point he does catch his first break. He is able to actually make contact with his son, the young Marius, who has got a small contingent of men with him, because apparently the king of Numidia, the young Marius, who's apparently very handsome, had some sort of dalliance, some sort of liaison or relationship with one of King Bocchus's concubines or prostitutes, who herself was quite rich. And so he'd teamed up, he'd already been in North Africa for a while, he'd teamed up with her, got a bit of money going, got a small army or a small contingent of men around himself, and he'd managed to just about rendezvous with his father. And so now Marius isn't entirely on his own now. At least he's got his son and a small number of men with him. But again, they're still completely on the run in North Africa. And there's one story where, again, could only be moments away from death. He sees on the beach 2 scorpions fighting, and he thinks that's a really bad omen. And he sort of thinks, I feel like, even though I can't see any enemy soldiers or anything, I just get this feeling in my bones that we're about to be ambushed. I just feel it, that there's something bad in the air. I can almost smell it. And so he decides, just on the strength of his gut, a gut feeling, that he'll take a small bark or a small boat out to an island just off the coast. And we're told that he was exactly right, because sort of out of nowhere, just as he leaves the beach, just as him and his son leave the beach, some enemy cavalry come riding out of the brush, and again escaping death by the skin of his teeth. That, quote, so Marius escaped from a danger which, it seems, was as great as any with which he ever met. That one, again, seems like he was just a few yards, maybe minutes, maybe seconds away from being caught. But he does just about manage to escape. Now, let's cut back to Rome itself.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.